I can teach you how to bewitch the mind and ensnare the senses. I can tell you how to bottle fame, brew glory, and even put a stopper in death.
Welcome to Snape Chat, the voice of the Snapedom, the podcast where we discuss all things Snape, always. Join us as we dive into the world of the bravest man we ever knew in art, fanfic, meta, and more. Obviously, this is Snapecentric with episode 35. On this show, I speak with author The French Press. Then she reads from her story, The Funeral Portrait. Enjoy the show. This is Snapecentric, and I'm here with the prolific and beloved author, The French Press.
Hello.
We're going to discuss her writing process and stories. Yeah, let's start. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I'm not a particularly mysterious figure. I think I've sort of put myself out there everywhere in the fanfiction community, in pretty much all of the platforms. I live in Australia. I think it's pretty clear with my accent. A lot of people get confused when they first hear me speak or learn that I don't actually live in France. So yeah, not actually French. I have 2 cats. Everyone already knows how much I love them, I think, but pretty obsessed with my cats. And I guess I have a pretty sort of normal life outside of fanfiction, but I spend most of my time doing fanfiction.
Well, we're so lucky that you do.
I don't really know. I can't even actually remember what I used to do with my time before I started writing fanfiction again. So it's funny. I think that it's a hobby that stuck this time.
Well, that's great. Okay. What brought you to the world of Harry Potter?
I started reading Harry Potter when I was really young. I think I read the first book when I was maybe 8 years old. And I grew up with those books pretty much like many people in the fandom. Yeah, I used to wait in line at the bookstore to buy the books when I was
Same.
when like on launch day. So yeah, that's always a fun memory, I guess.
Were you a Snape fan to start with?
I was.
Okay.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you why when I was younger, but as I got older, the sort of interest in his character grew stronger. Like I always I found him interesting and not necessarily relatable, but definitely interesting. And I think when I was a teenager, and like Deathly Hallows came out, I can't even remember how old I was when that book came out. Anyway, yeah, I was pretty fascinated with his character. I found him interesting, probably a little bit more interesting than some of the typically good characters, and definitely more interesting than some of the other sort of more beloved characters as well. He is unfortunately not as explored in the books as I would have liked, I think.
That's true.
Yeah, for me, it felt a little tiny bit like he was sort of there and there was a lot of potential for him that went pretty unexplored. And then suddenly you get the last book and it's like, oh, here's this story.
Yeah, there is not enough Snape in the books, you're right. Or in the movies.
I think it's worse in the movies.
Yeah, they just don't have him doing much of... He's not in many of the scenes that we wish he was in.
I think, like, especially in the movies, Alan Rickman definitely he brought his own spin to the role for sure. But I think because of that, a lot of what made Snape was kind of left out. He wasn't as feral, I guess, in moments as he probably could have been.
Right.
I'm personally not a huge fan of the films. Don't really direct how I view the world. There are some things I like, but most of it is not for me.
They don't do the books justice.
They don't. I'm a book purist.
Yes, me too. How long have you been writing?
I guess I started writing when I was young, I think I might have been about 16 when I started writing fan fiction, and maybe a little bit younger than that when I started writing in general. Like I used to write a lot of short stories, and I think I was even writing a novel at one point when I was like 15.
Oh, wow.
And I actually have these files on an external hard drive that every time I look on that external hard drive, I find it, but I can't unlock it because I can't remember the passwords.
Oh, no.
For some reason, I know I locked them behind passwords, these documents. What was 15-year-old me thinking? Like, what was I writing that needed to be kept so secret from the world? It couldn't have been good. It was probably pretty bad.
But still, it would be nice to look back.
Definitely. I'm a little bit curious to know what I was actually writing at the time. But yes, I did write and start publishing my first ever Harry Potter fan fiction when I was 16, I think. And for a while I was writing, and then I think I took a big break. So about 7 or 8 years before returning to writing again in at the end of 2020.
Oh, okay. So did you publish your early fan fiction, or?
Yes, I did, but it does not exist on the platform, any platforms anymore. I think I took it all down when I left fandom for a bit. I didn't really leave as such. I sort of just stopped writing. But they're somewhere, probably on the same external hard drive, to be honest. But they don't exist online anymore.
That's our loss.
I don't think so. If I'm completely honest with you, I'm a very different writer now than I was back then. I think, time and maturity has changed my writing quite a lot. And I think if I were to look back and read any of my old work, I would probably cringe pretty hard.
I don't know. I always like to look at early works. Now, you've published more than 130 fics on AO3 in less than 3 years. How have you accomplished so much?
That's tricky. I think at the beginning, I was just excited to be writing again after such a long break. And I was just like, when I start a hobby, I tend to sort of throw myself at it completely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of what drove me when I was writing and putting out the first couple of fics that I did upon returning to the fandom. And then after I sort of started joining some of the fandom communities on Discord and Facebook, I started to make some new fandom friends. And, when you start talking to people who are interested in the same thing as you start getting more excited about it, and it just sort of like fuels your creativity and your passion for it. And I think that that's kind of what happens.
Great. Why is Snape a favorite character of yours?
I think it's because he's not a straightforward character. Like he's neither good nor bad. He's nuanced. He's damaged. He's grumpy. He's the craggiest dude. I love it though, because I don't know, there's just something about a person who you never quite know what you're going to get. And it's interesting. It's intriguing. So I don't know. I kind of like how I probably have a type, to be honest. That quiet, brooding, but then sort of savage when they need to be, or when prodded, I suppose. Yeah, I always liked that about him. And I suppose like some of that comes from his interpretation in fan fiction and what other writers have put on him. But I think that there's always sort of like being there, lurking.
Mm-hmm. Do you consider yourself a multi-shipper?
Oh, that's a tough question, actually. In a way, yes, because I do ship like a few different ships, but I haven't written a lot of the ships that I do enjoy, I suppose. So I would say, like, in terms of what I've written, I guess I've written maybe like 3 to 4 different ships. But in terms of like Snape ships, I've only got 2.
You're very active in the writing groups. You touched on Potions and Parchment and Snuna Supremacy that are on Discord and Facebook. Can you tell us kind of how those work?
So I guess with the social communities that I'm in, like, for example, we'll start with Potions and Parchment. It is cross-platform. So that one is both on Facebook and Discord, and I suppose I help moderate that particular one alongside Deep Shadows 2 and Red, who is the owner of the group.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we try to organize events and fests and things like that to run throughout the year to try and engage creators like artists and writers and readers to sort of keep the enthusiasm for the ship alive, which can be a bit tricky sometimes because you never know what's going to hit or miss in terms of what people want to see or participate in. At the moment, yeah, I think T is running a Halloween fest, and generally we run an exchange every year, which is always really fun. And yeah, I think people really like exchanges. I find them fun but terrifying and a lot of work, especially when I have to run one. But yeah, and it's kind of the same on Sooner Supremacy, where Nick, who is pretty much she's the most enthusiastic Snooner artist, and she started the Sooner Supremacy group on Discord, and I help out with running fests sometimes there and just trying to promote Snooner a little bit more because it's a little baby rare pair, which we love so much.
Yeah, you were on our Snooner show along with Decory and was it Nocturne?
Yes, Nocturne.
Okay, yeah. It was just on our last show about snooping. So, okay. What is your writing process like?
Okay. So it really depends on what I'm writing as to sort of what the process is. But I will probably say my main process is if I'm writing a longer chaptered fic, I usually start with an idea. Then I take that idea, do a bunch of research, and turn it into an outline. I'm a huge outliner. Even if it's only 2 or 3 chapters long, I will outline. I generally will write a pretty thorough chapter breakdown. And then after the outline's sort of complete, I start writing each of the chapters. I write all of my fics to completion before I post them, especially if they are a multi-chapter fic. Basically, if an outline has to change as the story gets written, I will adapt and change it as need be, especially if while I'm writing something doesn't quite fit or I want to add something else. I can do that. It's not a big deal. Sometimes my stories will start off having more or less chapters than I think I'm going to write, and then by the time I'm done, it might be a completely different chapter count. Who knows? But generally speaking, I do start with a pretty thorough outline, and then it is open to some suggestion afterwards. If I'm writing a one-shot or something shorter like that, I rarely write outlines for those because they don't really need them, but I usually do keep like a few little notes in my phone.
Do you compose on your phone or?
Very rarely. I find typing stories on my phone quite tedious. So I generally use my laptop because it's a lot quicker for me.
Do you use betas?
I do. I always have a beta for pretty much everything that I write, especially if it's a longer work. The very, very few exceptions to that are occasionally if I write a ficlet or a drabble, I won't necessarily engage a beta, but I, generally speaking, will have a group of people who I rely on to kindly edit my work. I want to keep myself open to suggestions, so I tend to use betas because I want my work to be looked over by somebody I trust who will give me an opinion about whether something is or isn't working.
Okay.
Because I don't believe that I'm a perfect writer at all, like not by any means. And I think having somebody there to tell you whether something is or isn't working is a good thing. Like you're only going to improve as a writer if you don't get too attached to something in your story.
Having read a number of your stories, I get the impression that you do romance with a capital R. Do you ever feel constrained to stay with that? Or would you like to break away sometimes?
So I think I naturally lean towards writing romance because many of the tropes that I enjoy have a romantic component. I I don't necessarily feel like I'm constrained to just writing romance. I think it's something that I have a natural affinity for, but I've definitely sort of been branching out a little tiny bit more lately because I have been kind of experimenting a tiny bit with my fan fiction writing to sort of make way for more original writing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah. But I do like romance.
I do too. One of your most popular stories, A Most Unlikable Man, features Snape and Hermione in a Muggle flower shop AU. How do you use it to highlight aspects of their personalities?
So I think without the magical world, like I don't think that the characters necessarily lose their personalities just because they don't use magic. I like in A Most Unlikable Man, Snape is still antisocial and grumpy and pretty unlikable by the general populace. And Hermione is bossy and kind of undeterrable. And she really just goes for what she wants because that's sort of like her bold nature is still there. So it's not difficult to write an AU if you kind of utilize their personalities as they are usually seen, cling to their flaws because the flaws are what make them interesting.
Right.
And I don't know, I find straying away from like Mary Sue type characters and characterizations of them because, well, they're kind of, for me, they're a little bit flat. And so I think as long as you continue to utilize the most important parts about them that make them who they are, it doesn't matter if there's no magic.
Yeah, and they're both such interesting characters. You're right, they kind of can transcend the magical world.
Yes, and I find like even in stories that I write where they are still magical but living in the muggle world, it's sort of the same thing. Like I write a lot of fics that aren't necessarily set at Hogwarts or in a magical setting where they sort of go off and do a muggle thing. And I mean, the magic doesn't, I haven't ever really focused too heavily on magic in many of my stories. It's there and they still use it, but it's not the main focus. The main focus is sort of like a character study, I suppose.
What are some of your favorite tropes?
Where to start? I have a lot of favorites, but I think if if you were to ask anyone, it's always mutual pining is my number one. I think
Uh-huh.
I'm a sucker for it. The pining, the angst, the oh, constant agonizing over whether the person would ever love them back.
Right.
Like, oh, I'm not willing to say anything. I'm not going to make any moves. I'm just going to pine.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I do write Snape as a bit of a world class piner.
Yes.
And I do like a sort of friends to lovers, co-workers. Yeah. Most of my favorite tropes involve a lot of, angst as well. Yeah, so I do like it in an angsty story.
Oh, I do too.
I think that's a carryover for
Yeah.
I like an angsty story that resolves happily, I suppose. But I've been finding lately that I don't necessarily need it to be a happy ending. I'm not fussed if it's a bit of an ambiguous one.
I don't like it to be guaranteed, I guess. Sometimes I'll be reading angsty fic and just really into it. And then they're like, oh, there's going to be a happy ending. Don't worry. It's like, no, I want to worry. I want to not know.
Yeah. I want that exquisite anguish, the agony
Yes.
of not knowing necessarily.
Right.
I think it can also take you out of it a little tiny bit if you know that there's going to be a happy ending. Like, I don't want it to sort of go from being angst, 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 and then suddenly it's happy. Like,
right.
work me towards that happy ending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the funeral portrait, you explore the nature of dreams and reality. What was it like to create this world?
That's a complicated question because I didn't create this one all on my own necessarily. I had the help of a brainstorming partner who actually has helped brainstorm quite a few of my fics and done a lot of research for me. Asphodel and Absinthe,
Oh,
they are a wonderful person and so clever. But basically, the way Funeral Portrait came about was it started as a one shot that was based on a little snippet that Deep Shadows 2 wrote, where I was so fascinated by the idea, and then I turned it into something entirely different. So inspired by, but not at all related to, I suppose, in a way. But the idea of her being in a coma and not quite understanding or having a grip on what is and isn't real, it's an interesting concept, I think, and something that isn't necessarily always explored. I think the idea of dreaming. So sometimes when you're dreaming, you're so sure that what is happening in your dream is real. And it's only when you wake up that you realize that the dream wasn't real at all. And I think it's actually something that I think is explored quite a lot in the film Inception. And I didn't even realize that that is something that might have actually had a little bit of an influence on it, but not necessarily directly, but the ideas. And in a coma, it's kind of like being asleep for a long time, not necessarily the same as sleep. Like I know being in a coma isn't the same as sleeping, but using the same idea or concept as dreaming and turning it into a world where she's so convinced that she's living a life only to sort of realize that she's not. It's interesting.
it is.
But yeah, the idea for the, oh goodness, actually, I probably shouldn't keep going with this because I worry that I might spoil things.
Okay. Yeah, because you'll be reading from the funeral portrait after the interview.
Yes,
Yeah. Is it one of your favorite stories?
it is my favorite story that I've written. I think because the writing process involves so much reading and rereading and editing and all of that you kind of get sick of reading your own work after a while, and it makes it hard to decide or choose what a favorite of yours might be because you've gone through that process. But for me, even though it took a lot of work and a lot of research and a lot of editing, I still think it might, like, it's a fic that I can read of my own and read to completion without cringing or being bored.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's great. In your fic Orbital Decay, Hermione spies Snape scoring some muggle drugs. She makes it her mission to take care of him and get him cleaned up. And he, of course, resists. What do you think this says about their characters?
I think it says everything about their characters. It's
Yeah.
the core of their characters. Hermione being a stubborn person who can't help but meddle because she thinks she's doing it for their good. Like, and Snape resisting any kind of help is just classic Snape. Like
Oh, yeah.
it goes back to his teenage days of not wanting Lily to come to his defense and him lashing out at her. He doesn't like being helped. He wants to be self-sufficient and do things for himself and doesn't want to be helped or changed. And Hermione is a busybody. She is, and it's annoying. She's an annoying character sometimes, and that's good because people are like that. Oh goodness. Sorry, I might just, next door neighbor is being loud.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, she's imperfect, and her imperfections are what make her who she is as well. And I think in this particular story, it's like a prime example of a time where she thought she knew better, and she did in this instance. Like, he was being self-destructive in a terrible way, but it's just quintessential Hermione.
Yeah. In your story Liminal, Snape and Luna are unspeakables, partnered to research prophecies. What are the differences in the pairings of Snape with Hermione and Luna?
Well, very different relationships. Like, I think I've said it before, possibly on the Snoona episode, actually, but the dynamic between Snape and Hermione and Snape and Luna are completely different. Like, if you're reading one of the ships, you're not going to necessarily be seeking the same thing as you would with the other. With Hermione and Snape, like, their personalities are probably a little bit, I would say, like, their stubbornness and drive is a little bit closer. Like, they're very much like two people, like bulls locking horns.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Who can outstubborn the other, I think. It's very fire meets fire. They're big personalities. With Luna, I think it's calmer. She's a little bit more aloof, a little bit more hard to pick because I guess there's just a little, like, she's just a gentler character than Hermione is in general. So I tend to sort of lean towards sort of like more fluffy, slightly more light-hearted stories when I'm writing a Snoona fic. More heart comfort, and they have more of a kindred spirits dynamic in a different way. Like, both outcasts, both of them sort of bullied. Whereas I wouldn't actually consider Hermione to be an outcast. Like, she maybe started as not necessarily being very well liked by Harry and Ron or treated kindly by them at the beginning, but she became sort of like, essential to that trio, like, and part of a group and liked and popular. Whereas Luna's always been the weird kid, and I think Snape has too.
Have you ever considered writing under a pseudonym?
Like writing original fiction?
Um,
Or a different pseudonym?
I guess either original fiction or under a different name.
I have considered it, like writing under a different pseudonym for fan fiction and not telling anyone who I am, just to sort of gauge if people are actually interested in what I'm writing or with the name that's attached to it, because I think people know who Frenchie is.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I don't really know what the point would be necessarily, other than to sort of see if people are actually interested in my writing or if they're just reading what I've written because they've been following me for a while. In terms of fan fiction, I suppose it would just be a lot of work. Like, I know it doesn't seem like a lot of work, but managing so many different social media accounts on top of all of my profiles would just be like a lot more work than I think I could be bothered putting in for a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think in terms of like original fiction, if I do end up publishing, well, it's definitely not going to be under my real name.
Right. You've collaborated with artists like Luna P999, Nikori, and Turpinsimp. How did these partnerships come about?
Okay, so I love collaborating with artists. It's fun. It's good for us, like me, it's good for them. I get beautiful illustrations that fill my stories, and I think they get to draw something fun and challenging sometimes. Like, I'll ask them to do something that pushes them a little bit outside of their comfort zone, which is always good because, that's how you sort of improve at things, I think, is just pushing yourself just that little bit further each time out of your comfort zone. And I think it's the same goes the opposite way around. So if I'm basing a story on an illustration that they've drawn or an idea that they have, that can push me to do something outside of my comfort zone as well. But basically, the collaborations came around because I started being active on Tumblr. So I met both Nikori and Luna on Tumblr, and Turpinsimp, or Fleur, I met her on Instagram. Initially, I think Luna was the one who reached out to me first. She's the extrovert in our partnership. So she said that she loved my work, and I said, amazing. And And then I can't remember which of the two of us suggested we should work together first, but we did our first ever collaboration with each other in April of 2021 for Snapecentric, I believe. That was run by Rosejam. And we picked out a few of the prompts on the Snapecentric list and just made some stuff to go together. And actually, that's where Most Unlikable Man initially came from. It was one of the prompts. It was a Muggle AU. I think it was a Muggle Flower Shop AU. And that's literally what it turned into. And so, yeah, illustrating and writing together, we came up with the ideas for each of the stories together and picked out the prompts together, and it kind of went from there. And I guess with Nikori, it was a little bit different. She was already a pretty well-established Snooner. Well, she was the most established and popular Snooner artist at the time. And Nikori is shy, so I definitely took the lead there and pretty much feel like I bullied her into working with me. Oh. No, I didn't bully, but she was shy. And so I reached out to her and asked if she'd like to collaborate. And I think, because I was sort of coming into writing Snooner a lot more, and it was clear that I was kind of going to continue writing Snooner. It was just a partnership that worked really well. And Nikori is an amazing artist, and she is also a writer. And so she has a lot of fun ideas, but she's always amazing at bringing to life the stories that I've written exactly as I envisioned them. And then with Fleur, I obviously I feel like I just badger people into collaborating with me. That sort of seems to be my style is, find someone I like. Oh, okay, you're an artist. Cool. Let's work together. And it's been really fun. We've all come up with a lot of really fun collaborations together, and I think we'll obviously continue to do so. Nice working with other people and other artists.
Oh, yeah.
It's actually really fun to work with other people and feed off their enthusiasm and just be excited about something together.
What advice would you give to new authors?
The main advice I would give a new author is to just write, publish, and keep writing and publishing, because the only way that you'll improve is to continue to do it. If you don't do it, you're going to continue to sort of hold it in your head and get stuck. So it's better to just continue to write and just put it out there. And it doesn't matter if it's bad, because every experienced author will write a bunch of bad things before they write a good thing. And you can't write a good thing until you've written bad things. So even if it's in your mind not good, it doesn't matter, because you'll only get better if you continue to do it. Also, don't treat your writing like it's your baby. Be open to changing things or altering things, because if you don't, you're not going to improve. You can't hold on to something so tightly. I guess, yeah. Don't treat your writing like it's your baby, because you're not going to want to cut off your baby's head.
And sometimes you just have to.
Exactly. If something doesn't work, you've got to let it go, because
Where can we find you online?
Oh God, where can't you? Pretty much everywhere. I sometimes check my Instagram, but not very regularly, but mostly on Discord. You'll always find me on Discord. Obviously A3 and Tumblr. My Tumblr account is nonsense. It's just a collection of all the things that I happen to be interested in at the moment. So not necessarily all of it is Snape related. So yeah, a lot of the content that I sort of reblog and share there is a mixture of stuff I've made and stuff other people have made, or TV shows that I'm watching. So that is just a mess at the moment. And then, but yeah, Discord, I am on pretty much all of the SSHG and Snooner communities, and pretty easy to find.
And we'll have links on our website, snapechatpodcast.com, as well as links to Frenchie's stories. Well, I really appreciate you sitting down to talk with me. I assume you're sitting down.
Yeah, I'm sitting.
Well, Well, thank you so much. And
Thank you. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your night.
And enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I really enjoyed talking to the French press, and I hope you enjoyed listening to us. Now she reads from her excellent story, The Funeral Portrait.
Chapter 1. The tap drips. It's something she's been meaning to have fixed for a while. A note for the superintendent of the building is stuck to the fridge with a magnet. The hollow sound that rings through the flat when the fat droplets beat against the metal basin is rhythmic. Keys hit the ceramic bowl they're stored in by the entry as she shoulders her way in, arms laden with a crate she had not left with. Her foot connects with the door, kicking it shut behind her as she wanders through the sitting room, placing the wooden box down on her coffee table. Hermione drops into the armchair before it, staring at the envelope resting on top. The spiky, familiar scrawl spells out her name across the front, and she feels her chest tighten in response. While she'd been sitting in the ministry legal offices earlier, her heart had felt so squeezed she could hardly breathe. The official handed her the crate and the envelope before she was sent packing. It all felt very cold and perfunctory to her. There is a lump in her throat as she swallows, tongue darting out to wet her lips. She hasn't cried today. She'd expected to cry, but nothing came. The reading of his will had come late despite how long the funerals for the fallen had been held. Snatching up the envelope, her thumb traces over her name, the texture of it rough against her smooth skin. She feels a little sick now that the numbness has worn off. It helped that she'd been able to get through the first half of the day with her occlumency shields raised. Now she drops all of her mental shields. It's far too draining to maintain such a complicated spell for more than a few hours at a time. Now she is alone at her flat with no one but her thoughts for company. Now she has a box full of his personal effects and belongings sitting on the coffee table before her and no idea what to do with it all. Now she is well and truly alone in the world. All she has left of him is contained within that crate. She sighs softly, the otherwise empty room echoing the sound back to her. Her fingernail catches the seal on the back of the envelope and she flicks it open. He's left her a novella. His black, spiky script is small and evenly spaced on the parchment before her. Despite the deep ache growing within her as her emotions return, she smiles at the sight of it. It's been 2 months since the last time she'd seen it. It's been 2 months since the war ended, and once again, everything was flipped on its head. It's been the longest 2 months of her life learning to live without him. A sob catches in her throat at the thought. Closing her eyes, she can feel the burn as she tries to regain her composure. Sucking in a sharp breath, Hermione gazes at the top of the page and begins to read. Hermione, if you are reading this, then I am gone and my will has been read. I never meant for you to have to see out the end of this mess on your own. I have no doubt perished in some undignified fashion at the hands of the brute bent on retribution for my defection from their cause. Though I hope that is not the case. Perhaps you are wondering why I've bequeathed most, if not all, my earthly belongings into your hands. To explain that, we must go back to the very beginning, and hopefully it will afford you some clarity. You already know of my past and the unfortunate repercussions that came as a result of my friendship with Lily Potter, and the unforgivable things I said to her in my shame and anger. But I did not address the times I was compelled to be unkind towards you as a student. I justified my behavior at the time with the pathetic excuse of trying to maintain some sort of charade, the Dark Lord. This might have been true, but at any rate, I was in a position of authority over you at the time, and my treatment of you was not befitting that of an educator. For all the times I belittled your intelligence, made cruel jokes about your abilities, or insulted you, for any of the times I made you feel lesser, I sincerely apologize. I'm truly sorry for any harm I caused with my callousness. I know you're likely to attempt to absorb some of the blame, but you were a child then and you were blameless. You didn't deserve it then, and you do not deserve what has happened to you since as a result of the war. There are innumerable other things I should likely be apologizing for, not in the least for all the times I could have been kind to you but chose to hold you at arm's length. I berated you, lectured you, lied by omission, yet you bore it all like no one else could. I should have come clean about my sentiments, but I was a coward and I used the waging war as an excuse to continue to guard myself. That you are reading this now means that I was wise to do so, if only to save us both from pain. I should have told you that I'm enthralled by you, Hermione Granger, as I have seldom been by anyone else. I should have told you that I'm fond of your eyes and your warmth, and there were many times I wanted to bask in the glow and forget about the rest of the world. I should have told you that you are the smartest, bravest, most beautiful witch I have ever known, and my full heart has given itself to you. Even if you had rejected me outright, at least I wouldn't have died, never knowing what you might have said in response. It's been an honor to know you, Hermione. I know my possessions are meager, but I will all of them to you. At the very least, I hope we were able to make our world a safer place for you to live in before I died. Please forgive me, Hermione, for the many ways I wronged and failed you over the years. Yours always, Severus Snape. As the parchment falls from her fingers towards the coffee table, one of her hands cups over her mouth to muffle the sobs threatening to escape. Tears run unchecked down Hermione's face as she blinks them away. She can't see. She can barely breathe. And there is a ringing in her ears as her emotions pour out of her. The ache in her chest is angry and raw, almost as if he'd died again while she read the letter. He loved her, she thinks, as the waves of sadness continue to buffet her. He loved her, she thinks, as she mourns what could have been. He loved her, she thinks, as her heart breaks anew. Swiping furiously at the outpouring of tears which coat her face, she is sure she looks a wreck, but finds it difficult to care. She loves him still, and this feeling within her of unbearable loneliness, of having her last remaining friend taken from her, of the unrequited love that endures within her, love which will never abate. She gasps now, huge sobs coming rapidly, and a panic attack feels imminent. The crying continues until she feels empty, and there are no tears left within her to shed. The flat now feels unbearably small as she lifts the letter off the floor where it has slid down. With trembling hands, she folds it carefully as she can before she tucks it back into the envelope. She makes a silent vow to keep it for when she needs a reminder that Severus Snape loved her. Hermione has no energy left to go through his belongings now, so she leaves the letter and crate on the coffee table as she wanders hollowly around her flat. She goes through the motions, but there's no conviction behind any of her movements. She feels like an empty shell, a ghost, and she can't imagine that it's likely to change anytime soon. The sobs continue on and off throughout the evening until she crawls into her bed and passes out from sheer exhaustion. In the morning, she wakes with puffy eyes she can barely open. It's from the wine and the crying. She isn't normally a drinker, but she justified to herself that the revelations of the night had warranted it. Sharp, loud knocking sounds from her front door, and Hermione groans as the noise makes her throbbing head feel as though it's been put through a wood chipper. Pulling her dressing gown around her, Hermione passes a mirror in the hall on the way to answer the door. She looks worse than she feels. Disgruntled, she drags her feet as she goes to the door. There isn't anything she can do now. At the door, she clears her throat, wishing for some forethought with regards to her drinking from the night before in vain. When it swings open, Hermione is immediately frozen in place. Her body trembles uncontrollably, and her fingers itch to reach out and touch the man standing before her, if only to confirm he's there. He isn't ill, she reminds herself. He remains silent and impassive as her eyes dart over him. He looks exactly the same, but now the hair at his temples is shot liberally with silver. Sir Severus, she can't keep the stammer out of her voice. She must be hallucinating. A small smirk appears at the corner of his mouth, and she nearly swoons. Hermione, he breathes, his voice quiet. You died, she finally says, putting voice to one of the questions swirling through her mind. It's chaos that she needs to know because she's just spent the better part of the past 2 months mourning him. It did appear that way, yes. How? His smile is wider now. A story best told inside, perhaps. He cooks a dark eyebrow at her, and her heart skips a beat. Merlin, she has missed him. Hermione steps aside, and before he can walk right inside, Right before she can second guess herself, as she always does, she throws her arms around his neck. He grunts softly as he catches her, and soon their lips are connected, meeting gently as tears flood her eyes once more. They kiss like two people who have been walking the desert without a drop of rain. When they part for him to walk the rest of the way into the flat, Hermione stops him once more with a gentle hand flat over his heart. Having him essentially come back from the dead, she doesn't want any more secrets. I love you. The words leave her mouth and hang in the air between them. He smiles again, his obsidian eyes sparkling with the warmth with which his letter claims she is compromised. Oh. Severus isn't so guarded now. The lines of stress and exhaustion are mostly faded. There is still an important conversation to be had, but for now she is filled with relief. I love you too. Time grinds to a halt as everything else fades into the background as she beholds him. It matters not that there is a leaky tap, nor that the conditions are hardly ideal. All that matters is that he's here. Why did you wait until now? It's been a week since he showed up at her door, and they were so distracted Hermione forgot to ask the important questions. She turns over to lie on her side so she can face him on the bed, uncaring that the sheet covering her hips slips down from her movement. His dark eyes fix on her face before he shifts towards her, one of his long arms wrapping around her middle. It wasn't safe before, he tells her. I needed to be certain things would settle the right way after the war, that you would be taken care of. You weren't planning to come back, were you? She asks. Severus shakes his head. I was not. But you did. A smile curves his lips. I did. That letter. I wrote that letter the week before things came to an end, he says, cutting her off. I wanted you to have the letter because you deserved the apology that was written on it. I'm not very practiced at apologizing to people, but you always deserved one, and I thought it would be the easiest way. I told you that I loved you in this letter because I wasn't planning to return, but after I knew you'd received it, I knew I wouldn't be able to keep myself away. I missed you. She knows exactly how he feels. After living together in that safe house, just the two of them for so long, even her tiny flat felt empty before now. Hermione feels a sob rising in her throat, and as it unwillingly escapes her, he tightens his hold, tucking her head beneath his chin. His long fingers stroke her back as the tears escape, and she cries, the tears falling onto his skin between them. Severus came back for her. He could have escaped this world and his old life, but he chose to come back. It takes a few minutes for her tears to subside, and when she looks up at him, his face bears a mask of concern. She smiles to reassure him, leaning up to press a kiss to his willing, yes, willing, lips, so willing, in fact, that he gently pushes her onto her back and tangles his long fingers in her hair as he presses his wiry body between her thighs. So willing that his lips travel over all her exposed skin as he takes his time to memorize her taste. So willing that he chants her name over and over as they move as one and find their completion together. After, his magic whispers over their skin as he cleanses away the evidence of their activity. Hermione moves closer to him again, grateful that she can press her nose against the spot where his neck and shoulder meet, breathing in the scent that is wholly his, her breath tickling his skin. His deep, rumbling chuckle vibrates through her, and she loves it. She never got to hear it all that much before, and now she plans to give him as many reasons as she can to make that sound. He picks up the book they've been reading together from the nightstand, turning it open to where he'd left off reading the night before. Death strode away, stopped, and came back. He pointed a skeletal finger at the duck man. Why, he said, are you walking around with that duck? What duck? Ah, sorry. Tears of mirth fill her eyes as she laughs at his impression as he speaks. Soul music is a favorite of hers from her early years at Hogwarts, and she's thrilled that he seemed to enjoy it also. He refused to read it when they were stuck together in the safe house, but now she knows why was trying so hard to distance himself from her. They still have much to discuss, but for now she knows he's there to stay, and she no longer has to worry that he'll disappear. She wonders vaguely if this is some elaborate hoax her mind is playing on her, A beautiful dream it has concocted to protect her from the reality of actually losing him. Hermione finds she doesn't much care. If this is a dream, she's content to live in it forever. Licking the end of his cigarette with his thumbnail to knock off the ash, he lifts it to his mouth, drawing another lungful of acrid smoke, an old habit he recently picked up again. It isn't long before he reaches the end, crushing it into the stones of the cobbled path he is crouching upon. Closing his hand around the butt, it's disposed of with a whispered spell. He walks the short distance towards the hospital, away from the corner he smokes at, entering through the main doors. The receptionist, Elsie, greets him with a small wave and nod. He comes here every day, so they know him well by now. The lift takes him up to the 4th floor, and he disembarks to follow the same path he always takes. He stops in front of the room at the end of the hall. Originally, her room had been a little closer to the healer's station in case there was a sudden need for medical attention. But her condition hasn't changed in months, and now her room is located in one of those furthest away. Severus knows what this means. They've given up on her. He peers into the room through the little glass window from the other side of the door. She is as she has been every day for the past 6 months. Her eyes are shut, eyebrows scrunched together like she's in pain. He knows there's no physical pain, the healers made certain of that. No matter what they try, she's unreceptive to it. Back again, sir? The voice beside him jolts him out of his thoughts. His eyes dart to the left where it originates. Padma Patil is one of Hermione's healers, and if it is a choice between her and her Gryffindor twin, Severus would choose this one, no questions asked. In the beginning, he had been embarrassed at being caught visiting her. Now he no longer cares. The only thing important to him is the witch lying in a coma in the room before them. Healer Patil, his voice is gruff. She is the first person he's spoken to all day, and he's almost certainly dehydrated. No changes, I assume? Padma shakes her head. No, sir. He shouldn't be surprised, but every day when he returns, he allows himself a moment to hope in vain that something has changed. Nodding at the young healer, Severus gazes back into the room. Padma takes this as her cue to leave. He is grateful the witch never lingers or asks too many questions when he's there. He stands around outside the room for a while, trying to get his emotions in check. The lump in his throat makes it difficult to swallow, and he shoves his clammy hands into his pockets to dry them before pushing the door open. His chair is awaiting him by her bedside, and he assumes it quietly. Her hand rests limply above the bed covers, and when he wraps his fingers around them, they are cool and unresponsive. His chest feels tight, a deep ache that settles in his gut like a stone. Hello, Hermione, he says aloud. Speaking to her is part of his daily ritual now, and even though she gives no indication of having heard him, he does it every time. Breathing shallowly, he pulls a shrunken copy of soul music from deep within one of his pockets and starts to read aloud. Hermione once told him she enjoyed listening to him speak, muttering something about wanting him to read a Muggle phone book. So he reads to her every day, allowing himself to imagine for a moment that things are different. You could say to the universe, this is not fair, and the universe would say, oh, isn't it? Sorry. You could save people. You could get in the nick of time. And something could snap its fingers and say, no, it has to be this way. Let me tell you how it has to be. The words catch in his throat, and he has to pause in his reading to summon a glass of water. As he drinks, he also swallows back the tidal wave of emotions that threaten to spill over. He refused to read this book several times when Hermione offered it to him during their time in the safe house. Now he's filled with regret over one more thing he felt he should have done when he still had the chance. On the day the war ended 6 months ago, Severus's search for Hermione after battle was won, only to discover she was struck down by a curse. Now she is locked away inside her mind, trapped in a dream that even his skill with legitimacy cannot reach. The healers might have given up on her already, but Severus won't. He still works tirelessly on a potion that one day might restore her to consciousness. After he finishes reading a chapter, Severus pauses to gaze at the woman he loves. Her eyes are closed, and she always looks more peaceful after he's been reading to her. His throat feels like it might close up as he looks over her. Each visit he is filled with anger at the situation and himself. He should have told her he loves her long ago. Now he might never have the chance. Instead of dwelling on his foolish feelings for the woman in the bed, he continues to read to her until his throat becomes dry and the daylight beyond the windows dims. Severus leaves the room after giving her hand another gentle squeeze, every time hoping that her fingers will return the gesture, each time disappointed when they remain still. He leaves the room, and with a final glance at Hermione on his way out, Severus walks back the way he came. Padma is at the healer station when he passes and smiles up at him. As they both stand there, it's impossible not to admit to themselves that even with tireless work and a desire to heal her, Hermione Granger might never awaken. "I won't give up on her either, sir," she tells him. He is surprised by her words and inclines his head. "Thank you."
Thanks again to the French Press for joining me for some talk and reading. You can find the funeral portrait and more of her stories on our website at snapechatpodcast.com. And here we must say goodbye. We wish we didn't have to, but it hasn't escaped our notice that life isn't fair. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Tumblr and Twitter, or leave a comment on our website at snapechatpodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Many thanks to Nix for our continued work on our website. Support us on Ko-fi to help defray the costs of production. That's ko-fi.com. Be sure to check out Care of Magical Shippers podcast and alwayssnape.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay snarky.